What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley, coming at you without my fantabulous co-host Adam Frommel. I am, however, pleased to be joined by regular guest, good friend, longtime colleague, Grant Hughes. Follow him on Twitter at GT_Hughes. A quick note before we get started, an apology to anyone who downloaded the last podcast and only heard me coming out of the left ear. I was going solo because Adam had to cancel, and it turns out my microphone on the program that I was using to record it, which I never used to record it, only records that particular microphone in stereo, which in turn only comes out of the left ear. So that will not happen again, but just apologies to the people that reached out and said that I was only coming out of your left earphone. So apologies once again. Grant, how are you doing? Can you hear me coming out of both of your AirPods right now?
Yeah, I just maybe wonder if you have a disproportionate percentage of your listenership that has a right ear hearing trouble. Like, are we sure that's not the problem?
One of my friends reached out, and I thought he was bonkers. I was like, did you check to see if your headphone was working? But then I tried it, and it actually happened. I was only coming out of the left ear. So I blame Adam because he had to get his second COVID shot, and he wasn't feeling too well, so he had to cancel. So it's obviously his fault, because if he were there, I never would have used that program. This never would have happened.
I would like to preemptively blame any bad takes that I'm about to have on Adam. Just if that's what we're gonna do, I think he'd be okay with that.
Yeah, and I think that goes without saying on the podcast that anything wrong is Adam Frommel's fault. At Frommel09 if you need to yell at him. I brought you on to do a really complicated topic. We're gonna do some fact or fiction. I know, very highbrow stuff here. We were just talking though that it's hard to discuss anything at this point when the games still matter, but like there's no ebb and flow to what's happening based on injuries, availability, what all these different teams are doing. And the awards discussion has been just talked about to no end, especially on the MVP front. And so I wanted to get a little bit topical or big picture as well. There were no holds bars on this, no limitations, and just go fact or fiction with statements. And I actually have one that I think might cut your soul a little bit. So I am ready.
I was excited about this. You prefaced, we were texting to set this up, and you did threaten to cut my soul. And so I tried to think about what it could possibly be. I'm going to guess. No, I won't try to guess. I just want to hear it from you before, so I can just take the cut, without getting ready.
I do have to ask you first. Do you have any thoughts, opinions, musings on whatever the hell is going on in Indiana at the moment?
I mean, just with respect to all the Bjorkgren stuff.
Did you see the clip of Goga going at, was it
Greg Foster? Greg Foster. Yeah, no, I didn't see that. I just read about it amid all the Bjorkgren stuff that's come out the last couple of days. I guess like the overall takeaway is, and Jake Fisher for BR had some of this of like, how do you not talk to enough people that could have told you that the guy you're about to hire, after like a search that involved 20 some odd candidates or something like that, how do you not talk to the right people that would have told you that you might be in for the type of toxic culture where stuff like this is going to happen at the end of a season? Like, that's wild to me. I want to know who I don't know. The thing that blew me away was reportedly the Pacers did not talk to TJ Warren, who played for Bjorkgren when he was an assistant with Phoenix, and then Warren supposedly requested a trade because he couldn't play. I just was like, man, you got to at least talk to him. What happened? Who did they talk to?
Right, and if they spoke with Nick Nurse and he endorsed him, like there's some subterfuge going on here, right? He was trying to sabotage the Pacers from the outside. How are you? What would be the point of it? Because what would be the point of endorsing him when this was apparently known stuff throughout the G League, throughout his past teams, dating back to Phoenix? How are you then? This stuff was happening in Toronto, is my point, apparently, where he was acting. My favorite, aside from the Warren one, my favorite anecdote was like, he had to be the vessel through which communication was run between players and the head coach. They couldn't talk to one another. So that stuff was happening. Was Nick Nurse like, get him the fuck out of here? Or was he like, they're in the East. We don't know what's going to happen next year, so I'm just going to sabotage them from afar. I don't get it.
So this is why I feel like really naive now, because when I read that part of like, they talked to Nurse a lot, and Nurse obviously, I mean, if I just assume that it's just like it's an unwritten rule that like, if one of your assistants is up for a head coaching job, you just have to support him no matter what. But the alternative is a little more plausible now, seeing how badly it's gone. Like now, like the next team that hires a nurse assistant and asks the nurse's opinion will just have to be like, I don't know, dude, this last one didn't go so good. I think maybe you're going to need to be a little more forthright with us this time, because I can't imagine what he would have said. He clearly didn't say any of this stuff. And so yeah, I don't know, man. This is wild. And just to have this spiral so fast, like it just a year. Usually it takes a while for whatever true colors to come out, or for players to get sick of coaches. Like the Pacers got sick of McMillan, the players kind of tuned him out towards the end, but that took a while. This is like fast track.
Yeah, and there's no way that he's going to be in Indiana next season, right? Like there's just none.
I can't imagine. I cannot imagine.
This is worse than the Igor Kokoshkov stuff in Phoenix, right? This definitely exceeds that.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah, that's another one. Because this feels like, I mean, it's almost like cartoonish. Some of the things that are being described with how he flies off the handle if like a ball rack is in the wrong place, it's wild. It's like bad, community college type coach stuff where he just like, I don't know. I first of all, what I will say is I cannot wait for more stuff to come out, because now when you get this kind of a couple reports like this coming out, that there's going to be more, because now the floodgates are open.
And I need to know who he pissed off recently that this came out now, because there's no value add to the organization at this point. You're not going to get rid of him. The change is going to come over the offseason, and even if you did get rid of him, I don't know what it's going to do. So did something just happen that triggered all of this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to know, like, all of the comments that have just come out, how long the reporting goes back that sourced those, like if some of the comments in like Jake's piece, for example, or from 2 months ago or something like that, and who knows? We'll find out. I think the shit has hit the fan, and now the fan is like just got flipped from medium to high, so it's really gonna
spraying everywhere. Everyone is covered.
I didn't want to get quite that deep into it. I got halfway into that metaphor and decided I was gonna back out. But thanks for taking us home.
Did you want me to start with the fact or fiction that I think will be gutting for you, or do you want to finish with that? I feel like we should start with
No, I want to start with it. I'm curious now.
Okay, fact or fiction, Stephen Curry is more likely to force his way out of Golden State than Damian Lillard is to do so with Portland.
Fiction.
I thought you were going to have to think about that a little more. This was obviously in reference to the Chris Haynes piece, which clearly wasn't like him. I know he has a relationship with Dame, but he clearly was not saying Dame said like F this, F that, all this happening. And then the Knicks, like, Mark Berman of the Post, like, took it and ran with it. Oh, the Knicks would be interested in Damian Lillard. Well, obviously, they and 28 other teams in the league. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the reason why I was so quick to say fiction, because like one, I guess to start with the Steph thing, I don't think it's impossible like that he could come to management and say like, guys, we're stuck. I can't do any more than I'm doing. You got a year to sort of, he wouldn't phrase it this way, but we got another year. And if this is the same result, if I'm killing myself to make us 500, we got to work something out. Like that seems plausible to me, unlikely, but plausible. But when a report like that comes out, and I had the same thought too, Haynes has connections to Portland. Like he's been plugged in there for a really long time. I think he started there, like on the Blazers beat, maybe. I could be wrong about that. But that is the type of thing that comes out. The sourcing is Lillard or his camp, because that's not coming from the Blazers, I don't think. So it seems like that is sort of that's just sort of paving the way for, if the guy that has professed loyalty forever and by all accounts is loyal, and Dame like is just unimpeachable, but like now there's like sort of, we're easing into a scenario where like suddenly it wouldn't be this world altering shock if Dame started to show up in like trade conversations or something like that, or he changed his stance a little bit on, I'm going to stay here forever. Like, I think this was just a little nudge and it was very calculated. So that's what makes it seem more likely to me. But even that is still hard to imagine. I think they'll try to do like everything else first. Like McCollum would go. Stotts obviously is getting fired. It seems like that writing is very much on the wall. But yeah, I think it's like it would not surprise me at all if Dame was the next guy, that suddenly became available that we didn't think ever would.
I want to be spicy and say fact on my statement, but I think I agree with you. I do feel like you, and it's funny how we sort of flipped roles here because you were lower on the Warriors going into the season than I am. I feel like we might be underestimating the raging incompetence of Golden State's like powers that be. I don't think that they like. I know their flexibility was limited this past offseason, and you can't. The Clay injury is nobody's fault. At the same time, like the roster around Steph felt like it was built without a rhyme or reason. Like even the pieces on the margins. Like, yes, I liked the Brad Wanamaker acquisition at the time, and he turned out to be like one of the worst players in basketball during his stretch there.
Yeah.
The Kelly Oubre Jr. thing was always questionable because it was another play finisher who didn't really space the floor. So Curry is extension eligible this summer, but he could enter free agency in 2022. I mean, you try and extend him. He is worth whatever. Age 33, the fact he's playing at this level, I don't care. And he's not the type of player to force his way out, and we have not seen this Dame type story where it's been, it's not from Steph, but maybe it's from Steph. And the fact that he's won 3 championships obviously helps here. But like if you are Steph, free agency is that close. You're at least entering the final year of your deal as the end of this season. You'll be talking about an extension, whatever. How do you not think about it? Because you have to look at this roster and say, we get Clay back, we still lack another shot creator. Like Clay has just never been that guy.
Yeah.
What does Clay look like coming off Achilles and ACL tears? I honestly, if Golden State gets the Timberwolves pick and like won't move it and move that player and James Wiseman for, I won't even say Bradley Beal, just whatever like higher profile name or names become available, I think that could be a tipping point. Or the other tipping point would be the Timberwolves keeping their pick, and then the Warriors have James Wiseman, who he's not damaged goods, but like insofar as he has a lot of trade value, tearing your meniscus after not having the best rookie season and probably not being deployed in the best way for most of it. Like, what are you getting with James Wiseman as the centerpiece, or the 2022 Wolves pick, which yes is unprotected, but the Wolves kind of sort of might not suck at that point when you're looking at Edwards, Cat, D'Lo, a healthy Malik Beasley, and then another high pick from this year. And so I'm just wondering, there has to be a limit to Curry's allegiance, right? There has to be.
So this is something I flipped on over the course of the years. I defended the Wiseman pick. I thought it was the right pick at the time, just because to me it seemed like he gave them the biggest lottery ticket towards like, this is the guy that as Steph winds down, he becomes our Anthony Davis, and like we get a sort of Spurs Kawhi transition of power type of thing from the Duncan Ginobili Parker era. But Wiseman, like he didn't have it. It's so early and it's so crazy to say all this stuff about a guy that, 3 college games, blah, 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 stuck into a situation where like this is the great failing of the season, where the Warriors sort of tried to do both. They tried to develop him and they tried to win, and they tried to like involve him in the winning, and he just wasn't ready to do that. And it ruined his confidence. He has he can't catch the ball. He's totally lost on both ends. So I don't see like superstardom in his future, which again, like it's ridiculous to say this early in his career, but if they don't trade him and this pick or the whichever iteration of the Wolves pick they have, if they don't do that, I think it's a mistake. Like, I think even though I also don't know that there's a trade out there that puts them into the contender class. Like, we've talked about this before. I don't know that Beal puts them in the contender class. Like, I'm skeptical about that, but but they got to do it now, right? Like there's no question they have to make that move. That like Steph is too good, and like the point you just raised of like the door will be open soon. So if you care about him staying, you have to the trade. Wiseman has to be moved, and that pick has to be part. Like that's just, it seems simple to me now. Ask me again in like 3 months, but that's how it looks to me right now.
Would you do? And this is because if Dame isn't available and Bradley Beal isn't available, and I'm trying to think of, would there be even another star that you could tab as the next one? Karl Anthony Towns feels at least a year away from that becoming a problem. would you give up the pick and Wiseman for and whatever other salary you need to? I think it gets weird because these two players, Wiseman and this year's pick, would make so much money, but it's not a ton of money. But like you can't attach Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah.
But the framework would be Wiseman and the pick for Malcolm Brogdon and Miles Turner.
Oh man, I wouldn't dismiss that out of hand. I think that might be what it. So unless the next star, next non-Dame star to sort of suddenly be to take over Beal's spot and the guy we speculate over forever, I think that's like what they might have to settle for. And like really, that would make them so much better. That would be like that could make a huge difference because I like that trade a lot. I would think hard about that. I really would.
But so I guess what then you're saying, and I think I'm in agreement with you, is that they're probably at the point where they need to settle for the non-star scenario incoming because Turner and Brogdon at their peak, fringe all-stars.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't make the trade for the player that's not available. So like if you're stuck in a position where you've got to pull the trigger, you just sort of aim at whatever's in front of you. Like you can't conjure up a target that isn't, so yeah, like that's totally plausible that that's what they're stuck doing. And yeah, it would suck if, that pick, it depends on where. I would feel a lot better if that pick like was 8th or 9th or something. But if it was like 4 or 5, then I would really hesitate because, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's the type of thing they might have to be ready to settle for. Because you can't, I forget who I was talking to the other day, but like, but Clay's going to be back. It's like, okay, what's he going to look like? How can you even price him in as like a, yeah, I mean, like, is he a positive? I assume he's a positive player, but there's like no chance he's going to be an all-star, right? Like he'll be better than Wiggins and Oubre, I guess, but like, I don't know. You can't, that's like not an argument to me. It's like, oh, well, Clay will be back. So they have their second. No, it's not. He's not, you can't count on him as a second star.
Even pre-injury Clay, I don't know if he alone would have made the Warriors contenders. Definitely would have brought them closer, but just what this team needs, their offense craters by almost 16 points per 100 possessions without Steph and Curry. And Steph is like only lifting them up to a league average offense when he's on the court. It's not like they're lights out and then they're dropping down to league average without him. It's, this is an NBA offense versus you're probably facing some variation of this at the Y when you go play pickup without him. Yeah,
we're talking about stuff that's 2 years old now, but like the necessity of guys like Iguodala and Sean Livingston is now like being felt because, they've had their flaws, but they understood like not only how to maximize Steph, but how to play off of him and get easy buckets for themselves, where just like Wiggins doesn't have that feel to that level. Oubre definitely doesn't have that feel to that level. And like no one else on the roster really does. So it's just like, if Steph isn't, doing what he's doing, like you said, the offense is like a G League offense, basically, if he's not out there.
This is a quick side anecdote, but did you see the thing, I think it was on Reddit, about Andrew Wiggins? I think they were responding to someone saying Wiggins doesn't show commitment to the game. And I would argue with just the way he's defended this year, that's not actually true. And some people just aren't, they're not as like viscerally like energetic. I don't know, like I've never been a fan of, his demeanor, he clearly doesn't care. Unless it's Kevin Love, fan of the ball, then yeah. But they were using it as evidence to justify his commitment by saying he had his girlfriend, and I'm hoping they collectively decided she was going into labor, and they waited to induce until after the game because he wanted to play in the game. And I would argue that unless his girlfriend insisted on that happening, you should not be using that as evidence of anything positive. And it's certainly not a positive reflection of Andrew Wiggins. It would be a positive reflection of the mother of his child, of his girlfriend. Like, I could not believe that was just, it was out there. I'll send you the link to it afterwards, but I didn't understand, like, why would anyone use this as a means to prop up Andrew Wiggins?
You gotta get off Reddit, I guess. I don't know.
It was someone posted it from Reddit on Twitter, but it exists. I'm not.
Okay. That's a double whammy. Do you want one? Do you have another fact or fiction that you've been sitting on, or should I hit you with one?
If you have one, feel free to hit me with one. I'm a little disappointed it didn't seem to sear your soul as much. I'm happy the trade proposal at least got you thinking a little bit.
Yeah, and usually I dismiss those out of hand, but no, it's sad that's actually that's them really. I don't know what I would do. I think I think I would probably do that. And the me of a few months ago would have definitely said no. Um, okay, this is a big picture one, and it's just one, and it seems convenient now based on how these two teams have performed over the last like week or so. But I swear I thought this, I don't know, like a month ago, or started coming around to this. And it's sort of it's two of them, so you can take them in whatever order you want. One, fact or fiction: the Suns are the most likely West rep in the NBA Finals, and the Bucks are the most likely East rep in the NBA Finals.
You are talking to the right person about the Suns if you want someone to say fact there.
I have to credit you. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off and say you were in on the Suns way before I was, but I am 1,000% in now. You were there first, though.
I've mostly defaulted to, unless you tell me that LeBron is not going to be playing for the Lakers, they're the team that you have to go with. I am probably leaning towards fact on that being the West thing. When you look at Denver without Jamal Murray now, the Clippers, like, they're kind of frisky, but they have these losses or these moments where it's just like, holy crap, what is going on there? I don't want to say I think the Jazz are a paper tiger, but they feel sort of a very specific archetype of player short, if that makes any sense. I'll say fiction with the Bucks, because one, that allows me to board the Nets bandwagon a little bit, and I think the Sixers are actually my pick to come out. I think they probably pose the tougher defensive matchup for Brooklyn, and that's how I've been viewing the context of coming out of the East, because you have Thibault, you have Green, you have Ben Simmons, who you can't stop these guys, but if there's any perimeter defender that can just delete one of them from the planet, it's him. Like, that's what he functions as a lot of the time. And then you have Joel Embiid on the back line. Will they generate enough offense is fair. The Brooklyn's defense is not going to be, maybe it throws off Philly with all their switching. I don't know. But so I'll call fiction there. I'll say fact on the Suns. Where are you landing on that?
So I similarly feel better and better about the Suns and going fact on that. I keep coming back to the Clippers because with all the other teams, like, Utah, they can only play drop coverage in the pick and roll. Teams always solve that. Like, it's just, they're so limited in what they do, and what makes the Jazz great and what works for them just isn't what works in the playoffs. So that easy dismissal, right? The Lakers, LeBron and Davis, if they're not fully healthy, can dismiss. The Nuggets, Jokic is by himself, great as he is, dismiss. Nobody else is really serious. But it's like, for the Clippers, I find myself just kind of not having a great, like, logical explanation for why I don't believe in them. And I hate being like, well, they collapsed once, so they're, they don't have it. But, like, I don't know, that's something. And they depend on jump shots, and they maybe, like, Serge Ibaka is super important. If he's not healthy, they have to play Zubats, and then you can only play drop coverage with him. So I don't know. There's stuff there, but yeah. So with the Bucks, the reason I was coming around to the Bucks is, like, I do think that I agree the Sixers are very well equipped to guard the Nets. I'm much more skeptical that they're going to be able to score with them because, one, like, we just haven't seen – I just think Simmons is too much of a exploitable but critical piece. Like, if you have to have him out there for defense, which you do, I think the offensive stuff, it's all the same stuff we've always talked about. It's just sort of tough to make that work. And if you can put a bunch of bodies on Embiid and say, like, Danny Green, Seth Curry beat us from three, Embiid still turns it over a lot. Like, there are ways there. So I'm less – I just feel like the Bucks, Middleton, Holiday, Giannis, that's pretty solid three guys to defend. And I think – I just kind of feel like the Bucks were the team that this year they spent the year, like, sort of figuring out, like, here's how we should play, like, in a series where we have to be flexible and all that stuff, because that was the big criticism, that they weren't flexible. And I just kind of think they seem like they have the combo that none of these other teams have of, like, here's our base style that we know will work against, like, the crappy first round teams we're going to play. But then now we can sort of do this other stuff that we couldn't before. So I kind of just like the feel of, and plus the continuity, plus the, like, big time something to prove. I like all the the hacky talking head aspect. I feel better about the Suns than I do about the Bucks. So I'd probably go fact on both, but I'd feel better about the Suns half of it for sure.
The Clippers are interesting because I think my main knock against them would be jump shooting teams can clearly win championships, but they were just so perimeter dependent. They've been about and I was looking this up while you were talking, I didn't realize it. Since the Rondo trade, they've been about league average in the frequency with which they take their shots from the rim and their free throw attempt rate. And if they're going to hover around league average in both those categories, they might be the, I don't want to say a sleeping giant, but sort of how the Bucks have been overlooked in the East, I feel like, because of Brooklyn and Philly. They might be that powerhouse in the West that hasn't been, and maybe people writing them off because Paul George became a meme. They've dealt with injuries and then they collapsed last year. I have two for you, and this is a good segue. It's Suns. It's a Suns one. Fact or fiction, Devin Booker is just as important to the Suns as Chris Paul.
I'm going to say fiction. I think Paul is more important. But the thing you just talked about, we were talking about the Clippers, kind of made me think about it a little bit more, which is that, so when you, like, the Clippers just have Kawhi and Paul George. They have two big wings that are just hard to handle. And Booker's not that. Obviously, defensively, he's not where they are. And, I mean, I guess offensively, he probably is about as good, but he's not as big as either of those guys. But you need, like, that kind of guy, I think, to get you the bad shots and make the bad shots at the end of possessions where the good playoff defense has prevented you from getting what you're trying to get, like the first 5 things you were trying to get. So he has a ton of value. He might be more valuable in the playoffs than the regular season for that reason. But I think the statistical case for Paul is, like, pretty ironclad. Like, it's just the box plus minus and the whatever catch all stuff you look at. I know box plus minus is significantly better. The on off stuff is kind of hinky. I think Booker's actually been better if you look at cleaning glasses on off than Paul. I don't know. That's not super persuasive to me. But the thing that I think Paul, again, we'll do like a talking head take on this, but I think it matters. Like, Paul just transformed the team. Like, I don't think whatever intangibles he brought, I think, have been significant. And it's like the leadership, it's the experience, it's the attitude, it's that type of thing. But it's also like, we can just run pick and rolls to death, and I'm going to make 10-foot leaning jumpers from just inside the right elbow when we need one every time. Like, I don't know, that's valuable too. So I think it's Paul, but Booker's had a great. I think Booker's actually, Booker's year maybe hasn't been as good as some people think, but he's very valuable. Just Paul's done too much for that team, I think.
See, I think I call it fact. And if you took Chris Paul off this team, they're substantially worse. But if you took Devin Booker off this team, I think they're just as worse, if not more so. And I've argued this on the pod before. A lot of it comes down to he might be more valuable in the playoffs. CP3 has a good playoff resume. The only one Western Conference Finals appearance, blip be damned. Booker having that, he doesn't have the experience, but just because he is bigger and he is going to have a better time getting off what should be tougher shots. But also, when you look this season, and I hate to repeat this stat because I had it on, I think, the last podcast that I recorded, is while Chris Paul draws more double teams per game, the percentage of his possessions on which he draws double teams is actually higher for Devin Booker. And the Suns, their offense is lights out whenever it happens for either of them. They're averaging 1.19 points per possession when Booker's double teamed and 1.18 when Chris Paul's double teamed. I think when it matters most, you're going to see teams that are gravitating towards Booker more because he's bigger, and they might view as one person's going to be able to not lock down, but be more of a nuisance to Chris Paul than it's going to be for Booker. And I just also don't think that we appreciate how much Booker has improved. I think he's better defensively this year, and it's most noticeable off the ball. But his offense, the way he can manipulate defenses when he's going downhill, he's a really good passer. And my other thing that I keep coming back to, and I think I've really become, this has been a stronger opinion for me ever since Chris Paul was inserted to the periphery of the MVP discussion, because that's what it is. It's the race for, contingency consideration. Jokic is going to win it in a runaway, as he should. But did the bubble not happen last year? And more to the point, did all the other moves not happen over the, Jay Crowder was a great addition for this team. Having a healthy Dario Saric as your backup 5 has worked for a lot of the year. I understand that Chris Paul's probably elevated DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton also has not been this billboard for consistency either, and he had shown a bunch of improvement on defense last year, specifically. Moves like having Torrey Craig, I think they would be significantly worse because Chris Paul is just so much better than Rubio and Kelly Oubre Jr. in a vacuum. But I just feel like we're looking at it too much of, the Suns were bad and now they have Chris Paul and they're good. when they clearly were at least tracking in a better direction before he ever arrived. And that was probably a big reason why he wanted to come to Phoenix in the first place.
That's a good point. I don't think it's right to say that, Paul is responsible for, Booker making the improvements that he's made, or, whatever else entirely. Like, I mean, even like Cam Johnson and Cam Payne, like you saw flashes of, I think Payne was pretty good in the bubble, so like coming out of nowhere last year too. But like those guys just,
he's a bubble Hall of Famer.
Yeah, those guys are just better than you thought they would be. Imagine this team with Tyrese Halliburton too, by the way, if they'd gotten that right.
It's amazing how this is a national podcast, and the Tyrese Halliburton pick has come up way too often, where it's imagine how good they would be with him. And I also feel that way about the Knicks. I know they have Emmanuel Quickley, but for a team that's been on the hunt for like a high-end point guard forever, like, why not just take Tyrese Halliburton? I'm not saying Obi Toppin's going to suck, and he's played better in recent weeks. The Knicks and the Suns are the two teams I'm like, yeah, he's doing great. Halliburton's doing great on the Kings, but how do you pass him up if you're the Knicks? But also, he would have gotten to learn under Chris Paul in Phoenix. That is just wild.
Yeah. No, the other thing that's interesting about the Suns, since we're just talking about them, is that, I was doing some work on, I forget, like maybe a weakness of theirs for something I wrote a week or so ago. And like Paul and Booker are like 96th and 95th percentile in mid-range jump shot frequency, and especially like short mid-rangers, which if you just picture the Suns playing, you can see Paul shooting that shot a million times, and Booker just gets a guy on his backpedaling a touch and pulls up and shoots over him all the time. But like that seems like a weakness. You shoot a lot of mid-rangers, but then it's like, if playoff defense's whole deal is to run you off the 3-point line and stay attached to the roll guy, and they're going to concede exactly those kinds of shots, are the Suns just going to make like 70% of their 2-point jumpers and just win every game by 20 points? They're weirdly equipped to make all the quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, bad shots that playoff defenses are like conditioned to surrender. Because what's the alternative? Like you dive out at Chris Paul as he's shooting from 14 feet and then like Ayton dunks 25 times a game. Like I don't know what the fix is.
I mean, Ayton has to want to dunk, and that can be iffy.
Yeah, that's true. That's terrible.
I think the biggest knock is probably point. For Booker has been that he's like, Chris Paul's been easily better in the clutch. Booker's 9 of 31 in the final 2 minutes of one possession games. That's 29% overall, 2 of 10 from 3. I just think he becomes more valuable in those situations for the playoffs. And I'm totally with you on the Suns. If they're taking the shots defenses will probably give them, that's huge. They're good defensively. Like they can run out a bunch of different ways. I don't know how well the Shards at the 5 units will hold up in the playoffs, but I would say DeAndre Ayton is more likely to get played off the floor on offense than he is on defense. And they also can go to this. They've gone to it a little bit. They have like this Torrey Craig, Jay Crowder front court that they can just run out, because you have these other bigger wings too with Mikal Bridges, fantastic by the way, and Cam Johnson. So they can go that route as well. I think people are harping to me too much on no one aside from Crowder and Paul really has postseason experience. I do think that matters, but I think it's become like too heavy of a talking point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I don't know. Can this be the Suns bandwagon podcast? Have you looked into getting branded?
Well, so the Timeline podcast, which is a Suns podcast under the Blue Wire umbrella as well, I had the two hosts on when I did Phoenix's outlook for the season, and I was higher on the Suns than them. And so on their podcast specifically, I've been branded as the National Suns homer. So that you're on the right podcast.
Good for you.
For that.
Terrific.
This is the other one that I had for you. Fact or fiction, Denver without Jamal Murray is more likely to come out of the West than the Utah Jazz.
Oh, that's a good one, Dan. What did they go, like 9-1 in the first 10 games Murray missed? Something like that.
I think they're 10-2 or 10-3 overall.
Okay, so in the ballpark. I think that's got to be fiction. As great as Jokic is, I do think, and we have kind of shit on the Jazz like indirectly. Only really said bad things about them so far, but like that's still a really good team that I think. Actually, can I cop out and like look at the matchups to just see who knows what they're going to be? Yeah, I don't know. So you're looking at, if the 3-6 happened right now, it's Denver Lakers. I'd be a little worried about that if I were the Nuggets. And then the Jazz are going to get probably the Warriors or Blazers. I don't know. Yeah, I think the Jazz could be a conference finalist, which is like pretty low praise for the top seed and like the best team all year by a lot of metrics. I just don't see Denver as having that ceiling. Assuming you can sort of make Jokic like, 20% less effective than regular season. Unless Michael Porter Jr. is going to average like 38 points a game for a full series, I just feel like they're going to be at a major talent disadvantage against almost anybody they play.
I'm in agreement with you, but I think it's after watching the Nuggets, I think it's closer just because how good Jokic is to where they're. I'm so inclined to be like, oh, of the 5 contenders in the West, they have to be 5th now without Jamal Murray. And I do think they'll miss the element of what he brings in postseason crunch time just because Michael Porter Jr. isn't used to creating for himself that much. They're also dealing with a crap ton of other injuries. Monte Morris, Will Barton, PJ Dozier is going to be out a while. They're playing Austin Rivers and Shaq. Like, they need Shaq Harrison and Austin Rivers right now, which is always a problem. So I default to that. Do you have others, or do you want me to keep rattling them off for you?
I have a quick one since we already sort of hit the Blazers. Fact or fiction, Terry Stotts is the main problem in Portland, and firing him will make the Blazers better.
I'm going to say fiction. I know people talk about he hasn't been inventive enough defensively, but the numbers with Jusuf Nurkic on the floor have been fine. They're above average on defense when Nurkic plays. And without Nurkic, like, what else are you supposed to have done? Is it because he's, relegated Derek Jones Jr. to out of the rotation and Melo's still in it? Melo's been good on offense this year. The opinions are always going to be split on him, but he can score, and he's shooting a good clip from 3. I understand why you would play him. So I feel like this, and I was higher on their defense coming into the season. I thought the Rocco pickup was going to end up being huge, and having DJJ, I thought that was going to be huge too.
Mm-hmm.
I just, looking back, it's like they don't really have that individual defender. I think if you would have inserted Aaron Gordon here as opposed to Rocco or even DJ, like if you had Rocco and Aaron Gordon and this defense was shitty, I get it. But like Aaron Gordon, even though he's not the best one-on-one defender, he gives you more juice there than I think Robert Covington does, who he's a little bit slighter, and I think he's just more disruptive as a team defender. And that's not, he's a great defender. I don't think they have that linchpin aside from Nurkic, and when he's going to miss as much time as he has, like, what else were you supposed to do? And I know they're kind of at the point where it's, you have to change the coach. What else are you supposed to change? So I get that. What coach is coming in here and immediately improving their defense?
Yeah, so I just think it's a personnel thing. Nurkic has been fine, but basically any other center they play, the defense kind of just doesn't work. Cantor obviously is a prime example. I just was thinking, like, the coaches you've heard rumored, there are retread options like Dave Yeager, who I think is a good coach, but has just run into personality clashes kind of too often for it to be an anomaly. Or like, I think I saw Brent Barry, who's in the Spurs front office, is another candidate. And like, I love me some Brent Barry. Like, as a very, very skinny white shooting guard as a kid, like, Brent Barry was kind of right up my alley. He was a figure I idolized, but I mean, like, he's got the defensive fix, and again, like you said, the personnel sort of seems like it should work. They got 2 defensive minded forwards, like it was Harkless and Aminu all over again, but like seemingly better, and it didn't work. So yeah, I don't think a change of the head coach is gonna meaningfully alter what the Blazers can do with the personnel they have.
I also think they've been like top 10 or top 12 in defense since Nurkic's return. I'll have to double check that. But like, their defense has not been completely incapable. There might just be, I think there's a talent deficit after Dame and CJ McCollum for the rest of the roster relative to these teams that they do have to go up against. I have this one is, I think it's tough. Fact or fiction, the 2 teams that will come out of the East play-in tournament it'll either be Miami or Boston, because I have no idea which one of them is going to make it, and then Washington.
So I read something before I'm gonna be wishy-washy for a second. I've read some stuff about Charlotte that's very encouraging for its playoff fate, like that it might be able to punch above its weight a little bit. Got some switchable personnel. They shoot a lot of threes. Terry Rozier can do some cool stuff at the end of games. Like, there's just sort of a decent, this team might be a little better in the playoffs than the regular season thing happening with them. But the Wizards are just like, they're just so hot, and they're gonna have the best player in the play-in game that they play. I mean, maybe even if they play Miami, like I mean, I don't, or some have that shakes out that way because they'll have Beal and Westbrook. Sort of undeniable that he's been good lately. You know, I think we both have probably been dismissive of the counting stats, you know, that he puts up for a while as not being totally indicative of how helpful he is. But yeah, I think it's fact. I think for sure Miami, Boston, whichever of those is 7. But I think Washington's got the momentum, and I think they have the talent. And like, I don't know if Westbrook's just going to keep doing this, and Beal's going to get you 30. Like, yeah, I think they're better than the Pacers. I think and the Pacers are coming unglued. We've talked about that. So I think I'm kind of into that.
Yeah, it's a fact for me as well. I think the Miami, if they're in the play-in, is a given to me. Just I would expect them to beat the Hornets in the first game, even though their offense has been not so great this year. I think I'm buying into Washington now, and it's more so the fact that they've had a top 10 defense while they've been going on this current tear. And Seth Partnow for The Athletic wrote about this. They were really unlucky on opponent three-point shooting at the start of the year, and that's kind of started to normalize. So it's like teams are over the stretch are shooting slightly below 36% on above the break threes now. That's not, first of all, that's not unsustainably low, and it's sort of a trade-off, or it's just correcting when teams were shooting like 40% against them above the break in the beginning of the year. And the other thing is their rim protection has been better, which also kind of makes sense because of how Daniel Gafford's been playing. And now instead of having Mo Wagner as like the primary big instead of Robin Lopez, there's Daniel Gafford. So, and Alex Len, for that matter, who's been pretty good for them. And what I keep coming back to is unless you are playing the Heat, not only do you have the best player of who you're going up against, but you probably have the 2 best players of the other 3 teams in the play-in tournament, right? If you're looking at Indiana and Charlotte as the other 2 teams, excuse me. Because I think Butler's probably the best player of the 4 right now. But of Charlotte, Indiana, and Washington, Beal and Westbrook are probably the top 2 players from those 3 teams, right?
Yeah, I think so. The only pushback I'd give is that I've just always been reluctant to give Westbrook full credit. But yeah, I mean, like, he's better than Sabonis. I think he's better than whoever else whoever else you'd list for the Pacers. And the Hornets are just kind of a bunch of guys. I mean, there's not like a top line star. A Hayward, I guess, but I mean, you don't really know what you're going to get there. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I do think too. I was writing about this the other day. The Wizards potentially getting the Nets in the first round as the 8-1 matchup would be a lot of fun because Russ might just like literally explode with competitive rage trying to beat Durant and Harden and just knock off this giant. I think that would be one of my most anticipated series if we could get it.
I think we might need Washington to like, can they get to 7? That's not even possible unless they get to the top 8, right? Yeah. So I think it might need to be the 2-7 because Brooklyn's 3 losses behind the Sixers for first place.
Yeah, and we're at the point now where that matters. Like I had been dismissive of like those top 3 teams and how many games back anybody was, but then the end of the season really snuck up on me. So I think those deficits actually kind of matter now. I have a quick one that's sort of related to that for you, unless you have another one that you've thought harder about.
No, I'm ready.
All right. Fact or fiction, only one of the Nets, Sixers, Bucks trifecta will appear in the Eastern Conference Finals, which means that 2 of those get eliminated prior to the conference finals.
I'm going to say fiction, and you must feel that it's going to be Philly and Brooklyn because you have the Bucks coming out of the East, and you think that's going to happen. They're not going to face a real threat in the first round. I guess whoever gets Miami, is that Boston too, I'm discounting, but right now Milwaukee would be matching up with Boston. So it would really depend on matchups. I guess there are some minefields here because of Boston and Miami being there. But Boston is just, you don't know, unless Kemba's going to be Kemba, you don't know who their 3rd best player is going to be on a night-to-night basis on offense. And that's a problem. Miami, do we trust their up? Maybe they'll have that sort of postseason bump like they did last year in the bubble. I'm going to say fiction. I think we get 2 of those teams in the Eastern Conference Finals. But if you're predicting like a Knicks, Sixers or Knicks Bucks conference finals, I'm totally here for
it. It's fiction. It would have been a better like, is there a 30% chance or 25%? And it's just based on my overarching thing with this season, which is that the regular season is like worthless in terms of predictive value. And so I would just almost treat going into the playoffs, with like some exceptions, as if this were the beginning of the regular season and you're asking me to pick like conference finalists. I think Miami and Boston would both be like much possibilities. And so the standings would have to kind of get a little wonky for this to even be possible. But I just think Boston and Miami are much more dangerous than the regular season play shows, and I think it's possible that the Sixers, and really all three of those, the Sixers, Bucks, and Nets, are less dangerous than the regular season shows. So I think they're all actually closer than the standings would indicate in terms of like their playoff ceilings or their what they could do. So that's just kind of the basis for that. But yeah, I think it's fiction too. Those three teams at the top are have a lot fewer question marks than anybody else in that conference.
I think I have a good one for you. Fact or fiction? Kristaps Porzingis is not on the Dallas Mavericks to start next season.
So you're saying they're going to trade him for what?
Cap space. No, I'm just kidding.
I think, yeah, to go get that second star they need. I'm going to say fiction, but I really like where this question is coming from, because I was just say we haven't mentioned Mavericks like once this whole time. And I think it's because we maybe just, I don't think, view them as like a real serious playoff.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think they're 1 to 1.5 players away from a title right now, which is why we're just not mentioning them. And there's the level of, I guess if it looked like Kristaps was going to have a good series against the Clippers, but then he was injured last year. So if he gives meaningful contributions and stays healthy now, maybe that changes the trajectory. But I think we have enough evidence, just given what they still need, that he could be on this team and be one of the 3 or 4 best players. I don't know if he could be that number 2. My main issue with saying fact here, my reticence would be, well, who's trading for Kristaps Porzingis right now? Charlotte would be interesting, but what are you giving Dallas to make that what they like? Terry Rozier and what? Are they going to be interested in that? Is Dallas going to be interested in that? I can't think of obvious suitors for KP.
Yeah, I think he feels. I think it's fiction, because I think Dallas would like to get that third guy in free agency and sort of see what it looks like with Porzingis, maybe like as a 2A and 2B situation, or even third if they got like, I don't know, if they got Kyle Lowry or something like that. But Porzingis is the type of guy that, how Miles Turner comes up all the time, of like, who'd really fit well on this team. It's like the guy who's Turner's a different level of defender than Porzingis is. But like the big guy that stretches and can block shots, like I think Porzingis's market is pretty vast, but yeah, like it's a different salary bracket than Turner. But I think it won't be hard to trade him as long as he's like semi-healthy. But I don't think that's going to happen unless next year is disappointing and like he's part of it. That would be my guess. Although I don't know how much longer his contract runs. I didn't pull that up while you were talking.
He has 3 years left on it after this one.
Okay, yeah. So that's plausible that after next year, if they don't like how it's going, that he could move then. But I think he'll be on the roster to start this coming season.
I have 2 very quick ones for you. Fact or fiction? The Toronto Raptors will be one of the top 3 contenders in the Eastern Conference if Kyle Lowry returns next season.
I think that is fiction. I love Kyle Lowry, and I think Siakam and Anunoby and Van Fleet. That's like those 4 guys, pretty darn good. I don't know if the next year, 1 year older version of Lowry, without more help on that roster, gets them up to the level of the Brooklyns and Phillies and Milwaukee's. Do you was that fact or fiction for you?
It'd be a fact for me, and you kind of outlined it, because they've actually destroyed people in the minutes those 4 have played together. You'll probably bring Gary Trent Jr. back, and they just haven't played their best players together this season. Part of that has been injuries and COVID, and then over the post-trade deadline, or maybe a little bit after that, it's been on purpose, it feels like, basically. They also now, it doesn't look like, I picked them to get into the play-in and win it a few weeks ago, which was clearly stupid. They're going to have a lottery pick now. What if they jump into the top 4, it should be over. I guess the real fact or fiction would be, will Kyle Lowry be back? And I hope that their decision not to move him at the trade deadline implies more of a commitment to keeping him, because I think that there's still something, like, you're not in a position to necessarily rebuild. You have Van Fleet, you have Siakam, you have Anunoby, you're about to pay Gary Trent Jr. You can be really good. And so I think if he stays, they'll be in the top 3, and I'm hoping he does stay, because I like Kyle Lowry on the Raptors. But I guess the real factor of fiction is, will Kyle Lowry still be in Toronto? I don't know. The teams that they were dealing with to trade, the Lakers and Sixers don't have cap space. The Heat will, and there can always be sign and trades. I still think it's the most ridiculous thing in the world that people thought the Raptors passed on this incredible offer from the Lakers because of Tucker and Dennis Schroeder. It's like, I mean, you're gonna have to pay Dennis, and then Talen Horton-Tucker's this nice mystery box who you also have to pay at the end of the season. I don't think you missed out on anything that the Lakers were offering you.
Yeah, I think it's probably fiction that Lowry will be back. I hope that's wrong, but the only reason I feel that way is it does seem like they were open to the possibility of trading him at the deadline. And like, yeah, they could have just signed him in free agency after that, but he seemed to be negotiating his next deal with whoever he was going to sign with. So I think if they were open to moving him, which seems true, and he was looking to sign a new deal basically ahead of time with wherever he went, which seems true. I don't know. It augurs towards him not coming back, but I think theoretically they could be very good without him. It would be gratifying if that. I love that core so much. I did the same thing. I kept picking them to make the play-in, like against all evidence that they were not trying to win every game. But I'm with you now. I think the lottery pick could make a difference, and that's probably worth more to them at this point than like just giving a top seed a run in the first round.
My last one, because I know you have to get out of here. Fact or fiction, the Chicago Bulls are screwed unless they jump into the top 4 of the draft.
Well, they lose the pick, right?
Yeah, top 4 protected unless they jump into the top 4.
How about just take off the second half of that fact or fiction? The Chicago Bulls are screwed. I like fact, big fact. It's I feel like I've been too harsh on them writing about them, but like I just think you sort of gave away 2 first rounders for like the ceiling that the Magic used to have, which is like overly simplistic and harsh, but it's like Vucevic puts a cap on what you can do. He's like, that's just how it is. And Zach LaVine, I think as much better as he's been this year, I still think that he's like, the empty calories are still there. And those are the cornerstones. And like, maybe Patrick Williams becomes like a guy that offsets some of their defensive weakness. Yeah. Like I hate how that team is built now. And both of Vucevic and LaVine, their contracts are not ridiculous at all. Like they're reasonably paid and movable. But you got to think about LaVine's next deal. They're screwed. I think. I mean, if those picks convey, like, oh my God, like that's brutal. They're in a tough spot.
Conversely, they could be in a good one if the pick doesn't convey, because it means that they have like a 30 as of now, would be like a 31.9% chance of getting a top 4 pick, which if you add that to having Vooch and LaVine, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, keep Thaddeus Young around, that gets interesting really quickly. The other thing is, unless I'm reading this wrong, the expiration after this year is just gone. Like this doesn't defer if it doesn't convey. It's just top 4, and if they keep it, they also owe their top 4 protected pick in 2023. There's like no deferrals listed, and I'm looking at the real GM pick commitments. So you win in a number of ways. There's a chance that missing the play-in, which they're obviously going to do, ends up helping them, but it's now this very precarious position, more so than before, where you acquired Vooch because you thought you were going to be one of those play-in teams. You're not, and does Zach LaVine having to go in the league's health and safety protocols? That's not something you could have predicted. It's something you could have planned around, I'm sure, by not making this trade. It's like, where do you go from here? Now you've obliterated most of your cap space, unless you want to get rid of Thad and Satoransky, who have those partially guaranteed deals. I don't think LaVine signs an extension because he's capped at a 20% raise, and that's like a difference of, based off 30% of the cap in 2022, it's a difference of like $10 million a year. And now you don't, maybe you will. Do you have the cap space to renegotiate and extend him to max him out immediately starting next season? If you don't do that, I'm not saying LaVine doesn't want to be in Chicago, but if you go through next year, don't make the playoffs or just get annihilated in the first round or the play-in or whatever happens, he has to start looking at other places. So there was always a risk involved here. It just feels much worse. And to the point that we're not even talking about it enough now that they're not going to make the play-in. And I feel like they have a lot more at stake in the draft lottery than has really been discussed right now, unless they have sort of airtight commitment behind the scenes from him, which I think you have to know he at least is open to staying. Otherwise, why make this trade? You can't. This isn't Kevin Durant. You don't go all in to make sure that you keep Zach LaVine in 2022. But if he said, "Oh, I might leave," you don't make this trade.
Right, I agree. I think they've got two players that they sort of are treating like cornerstones that I think are just like not the cornerstones of the type of team that you should be aspiring to be. So yeah, they're screwed for lots of reasons, I think. I have a quick one for you to go out on, which is, and it's really dumb, but I just want to see what your reaction is if you don't have a good one for me.
I'm fresh out of good ones. I'm not sure I had a good one to begin with, but now I'm fresh out of the ones I thought were good.
Oh, you had great ones. So this would be better as an over-under, and the number should be like 1.5. But I'll have to do factor fiction for it. Factor fiction, Kevin Porter Jr. will make at least 2 All-Star games during his career.
I'm just going to say fiction. I don't... Does he have the license to fire away that he has right now on a better version of any team? And obviously the Rockets being chief among them. Like,
I just wanted to talk about Kevin Porter Jr. because he's one of my favorite like late season stories right now. Just because of all the Cavs stuff, and then he got 50 at age 20, and the guys that have done that, I'm sure you've seen. LeBron did it twice. Brandon Jennings and Devin Booker. So Devin Booker made 2 All-Star games. LeBron made $1 million. Brandon Jennings did not make an All-Star game and was out of the league. Had a torn Achilles, but was out of the league before he turned 30. So you got a real broad spectrum of what happens to guys that can score 50 when they're 20. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, as a long-suffering Warriors fan who lived through I can remember when Tony Delk scored 50 points. And I can remember like getting excited about Vonteego Cummings like having 19 points, or just like when you're a fan of a really bad team, which the Rockets very much are, you see some weird stuff and you think it means something and it never means anything. I'm not saying that's Kevin Porter because he's clearly talented, but like that's a wild thing that we're talking a lot about Kevin Porter Jr. at the end of a season that has been super weird, and I'm just here for it. I'm enjoying like all of the craziness of that whole situation.
I just like he's sub 32% on 3, sub 30% on pull-ups. There's like that, this isn't quite rookie of the year, Mike. No, I'm not even going to say that because that's so rude. I just don't know. For him to make an All-Star team, there has to be a year where he's the best player on like a Bulls level team, looking at LaVine. I don't know if he gets to that point. I would be astounded if he gets there.
I thought you were going to say that he'll never touch 50 points again, which is actually, I bet you he will get another. I don't know, man. We talked too much about Kevin Porter Jr. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm with it. Thank you for coming on. Guys, follow Grant on Twitter if you have not already at GT_Hughes. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast if you have not already. I hope that this audio is coming out of both your earphones too, as well. Until next time, leave you with a shout out to the one, the only future All-Star, All-NBA, runaway MVP in honor of Grant Hughes, Kevin Porter Jr.